o'clock today with a specially extended news program. The Russian noose around the Ukrainian capital is being tightened. This morning there are reports of sporadic fighting between them, the Russian troops, and Ukrainian forces in various parts of the city as civilians continue to flee en masse. We came across a large number of Ukrainian soldiers this morning manning checkpoints, larger than yesterday, I should say. They were all twitchy. They are worried about Russian infiltrators. Speaking from an unknown location in the city, Ukraine's President Zelensky was defiant for his people, angry with the West for not delivering on sanctions, and thus open for the first time to talk about the neutral status of Ukraine outside NATO. Moscow is sticking to its line.
In accordance with obligations to our allies, President Putin decided to conduct a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, so that freed from this oppression, Ukrainians themselves could freely determine their future.
I remain in the capital. My family is also in Ukraine. My children remain in Ukraine.
And Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky appealed directly to world leaders to do more, warning that if they fail, tomorrow the war will knock on your door. President Biden has called an urgent meeting of NATO later today to discuss further action, with the West under pressure to cut Russia off from the key global finance system, SWIFT.
Good afternoon then from Kyiv, a city which is truly under siege. Russian forces are rapidly closing in, with reports of tanks and troops in a suburb just a few miles away. Ukraine has been bombarded by Russian airstrikes on cities and military bases for the second day. There have been hundreds of casualties, including civilians. Ukraine's president has urged his countrymen to resist and has called on Moscow to declare a ceasefire. At the centre of the Ukrainian capital, the seat of the country's democratic government, people have been taking shelter in underground stations and basements. Just over half a mile away is the Independence Square, also known as Maidan, which in 2014 saw such violent protests against the pro-Russian government then running Ukraine. And this morning, less than 10 miles north of the city centre, video has emerged from the Obolonsky district of what's believed to be Russian armoured vehicles in the streets. Jonathan Rugman sums it all up.
This was Ukraine's northeastern border last night, and though it was unclear who was bombarding whom, it seems that Russia's advance has not been without a fight. On the outskirts of Kyiv, you can see destroyed Russian military vehicles. Western intelligence suggests some Russian troops have deserted and that over 400 have been killed. The Ukrainians say a downed Russian aircraft hit this apartment block on the outskirts of Kyiv. 8 people were hurt, but remarkably nobody was killed. Ukrainians are now taking photographs, but some 100,000 of their countrymen are believed to have fled in the wake of Russia's advance. Much of the capital seems deserted, with Russian tanks reported to be within 20 miles of it. And Ukraine's president claims Russian special forces have already arrived with the aim of taking over.
I remain in the capital. My family is also in Ukraine. My children remain in Ukraine. My family are not traitors. They are citizens of Ukraine. Where exactly they are, I have no right to say. According to the information we have, the enemy has marked me as target number 1. My family is target number 2. They want to damage Ukraine politically by destroying the head of state.
Audio has emerged which seems to show a Russian warship ordering Ukrainian border guards to surrender on an island in the Black Sea. They radioed back their blunt refusal, and President Zelensky says all 13 of them were then killed in a subsequent bombardment. In Moscow, Russia's foreign minister doubled down on justification for this invasion, telling the leaders of 2 breakaway parts of Ukraine that their pleas for intervention could not be ignored.
In accordance with obligations to our allies, President Putin decided to conduct a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, so that freed from this oppression, Ukrainians themselves could freely determine their future.
This is what that freedom looks like, a downed jet in a suburb of Kyiv. The Ukrainians say their death toll is now over 100, with their president denouncing Western sanctions as too little too late. Ukrainians have been sheltering underground in the capital, forced from their homes by explosions, and many fearing their city is about to fall. I came with my parents and children, says this woman. Unfortunately, my husband and my brother said they didn't want to come, and they stayed at home. Thousands of others have fled to Poland, many here packing small suitcases in the middle of the night, though there's now an official ban on men aged 18 to 60 from leaving, though nothing may now save their capital from whatever the Russians do next.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Well, joining me now also from Kyiv is the Ukrainian MP Lesia Vasilenko. Lesia, it's good to speak to you again under these very difficult circumstances. You heard what we just said there. You heard what your president said about possibly talking neutrality with the Russians. Do you back that call, that conversation?
Again, I don't believe our president said about full neutrality with the Russians. I mean, the Russians have to back out and back off from Ukraine. We cannot, in the sense that you're saying now, it seems like as if Ukraine is to go and become a militarily neutral country. No, that's impossible. But I think in order to negotiate anything with Putin and to come to any kind of agreement with him, you would have to be crazy. We've been negotiating for 8 years, and this is what we have now on the streets of Kyiv.
The reason why I'm exploring this is because it struck me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the president, your president, is talking about the possibility of neutrality in those talks with Moscow because he feels abandoned by the West.
Look, there's definitely the feeling of abandonment by the West in all Ukrainians, in fact. We know well enough, and we were sort of preparing for it, that we would be facing the aggressor on our own, in our own country, on our own land. But at the same time, what the president was saying and what all of the Ukrainian people are saying is that really the West should have and could still do more, because at the moment it's like Ukraine is getting trashed to pieces, torn apart. We have Russian armies moving in all directions, and the West is just sort of standing by, looking on, like saying, oh, maybe it's time to do sanctions, maybe not. Oh, if we switch off Russia from the SWIFT, it's going to complicate things, oh this, oh that. Come on, people. This is a country of 44 million people. I'm speaking now, not just as a member of parliament, but I'm speaking as a mother of 3 children, as a wife, as a daughter. And I'm telling you, what we are facing is bigger than anything that Europe has seen since World War II.
I mean, the extraordinary thing here is that they were talking about cutting Russia off from SWIFT weeks ago. They were talking about personal sanctions against President Putin weeks ago. And yet today we know that the Germans, the Italians, and the French have blocked all these moves in the EU, and the Cypriots, by the way, a lot of Russian money in Cyprus. Why do you think they're doing this when the invasion is already underway?
Yeah, so sorry, I just interrupted there for a bit. I understand your question really well, because it's like, why don't you cut off Russia from the SWIFT? Well, why don't you? Because to cut off Russia from the SWIFT also means to stop buying oil and gas from Russia and all the energy resources from Russia. And I'm sorry, but if Europe would like to stop being a hypocrite for a second there, please, because claiming in 2019 and all throughout 2020 how the whole of Europe will decarbonize by 2050, we will all go carbon neutral, European Green Deal and all that, and still to be buying Russian oil and Russian gas and Russian fossil fuel resources, and that's that's not good, and that's not okay. That's not fair, that's not just, and that's not the truth that the European politicians are saying to their people. And the reason I say about this is because the SWIFT system is primarily used to pay for Russian fossil fuels and to pay for Russian commodities that are bought by European markets. So to cut off Russia from the SWIFT, why Ukrainians want to cut off Russia from the SWIFT so much? Because that will leave Russia in isolation without the markets. And Russia knows very well, and that's why they say in all their negotiations, yeah, go on, cut us off from the SWIFT, see what comes out of this. So my appeal to everyone who's a decision maker in Europe, in the US, and the world is to actually face the truth that we have a major aggressor in the world at the moment who is blackmailing everyone and playing everyone. Please choose your priorities and choose your principles. You are for lives, for saving lives and democracy, or you are for money and commodities.
Okay, finally and briefly, let's say, if I may, what are you telling your kids about this? I don't know how old they are, but what are you saying to them right now?
My oldest is 8. And then that's my son, and then I have 2 girls. One is 6 and one is 9 months. She's turning 9 months on Wednesday. What do I tell them? My biggest challenge is to keep calm and have a smiling face when I approach them and when I talk to them about whatever we're going through and whatever can happen. And I think that is the biggest challenge for all Ukrainian mothers out there.
I can imagine. Lesia Vasilenko, good luck to you and your family. Thank you very much again for speaking to us, and keep in touch. Well, there are reports of Russian troops meeting stiff resistance here and there, while Ukraine's defense ministry has called on all citizens to join the armed forces, saying there is now no age limit on joining up. Men have now been banned from leaving the country under Ukraine's mobilization laws. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in Dnipro. Lindsay.
Matt, here in Dnipro, people are worried that they are next. What you are experiencing in Kyiv now is what they're going to have soon. I think you can see behind me, shop has been boarded up. This morning we went to a recruitment centre where we met some of those men you were just talking about. They were all sorts of different kinds of guys. One was a government officer, one was somebody who worked in IT who I was chatting to. But they were very serious, I would say, even though they're older than you would expect for joining the military. One was 46. I saw one guy who looked like he was over 60, which is supposed to be the cut-off age. But they were very clear, and one of them said to me, I want to kill Russians. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? I mean, we're talking about missiles. And he said, yes, we can't do anything about the missiles. But if they actually come and try and seize this town, his town, then there will be fighting in the streets. And that, they say, is the moment when they will come into their own. Now, some of this you might say is heroics. But, you know, there is, as you would expect, when your country is invaded, a massive surge of patriotism and a massive surge of anger about what is going on. That this is a sovereign democratic country that's being invaded by Russia. The other thing which was really interesting is that President Putin yesterday was talking about denazification. Why does he say that? Because Ukraine was occupied by the Nazis in the second part of World War II. We met 2 Jewish guys at the recruitment center, a father and a son. They think we're Nazis, he said. He thinks that President Zelensky, who's also a Jew, a Russian-speaking Jew, is a Nazi. He's crazy, they said. And they said, we're going to fight.
Lindsay, thank you very much indeed. Stay safe. Let's go to Jackie in the studio. Jackie.
Well, President Biden has called an urgent summit of NATO leaders later to discuss the next steps. Britain has thrown its weight behind moves to cut Russia off from the global banking system SWIFT, while the Kremlin says President Putin will meet the UN Security Council today and warned that Moscow would impose its own retaliatory sanctions on the West. Here's Jane Deeth.
Stop Putin, stop war! The chant went up on the streets of Europe's cities last night, from Budapest to Paris to Portugal. This was Lisbon. As they protested against the Russian leader's invasion of Ukraine, in Brussels, the European Union's leaders were in emergency summit. What would they do to try to put Putin off his stride?
The European Union stands united. Tonight, European leaders were fully aligned in condemning the atrocious and unprovoked attacks. Now we have to meet the moment. We will hold the Kremlin accountable.
Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, announced a second swathe of sanctions meant to up the ante against Russia. They include a ban on the export of equipment it needs for its oil refineries.
This package includes financial sanctions that cut Russia's access to the most important capital markets. We're now targeting 70% of the Russian banking market, but also key state-owned companies, including the field of defense. And these sanctions will increase Russia's borrowing costs, raise inflation, and gradually erode Russia's industrial base.
But Ukraine had begged the West to go much further, to cut Russia off from the global money messaging system SWIFT, by which banks can move funds quickly across borders. Denying Russia access would make it harder for it to get paid for its oil and gas exports. The UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace wants SWIFT turned off for Russia.
Well, the UK led in Europe on lethal aid, defensive lethal aid for Ukrainians. We continue to do everything we can to support them. We not only with trying to be sort of leading on sanctions and trying to get other countries to support us in getting Russia out of the SWIFT system, but also making sure that we do everything we can to equip them to protect themselves.
But the UK has an uphill battle persuading some nations, including Germany, that banning Russia from SWIFT will work. They believe it will hurt their own trade, while Russia will simply find a workaround. Although the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz appeared to concede, sanctions haven't stopped Russia. In addition to the sanctions, we've also continuously tried to use diplomatic means to dissuade Putin from this wrong path. This didn't work, and he has now opted to take a war to Ukraine. But he will not win this war, because the citizens of Europe want peace and the rule of law and democracy, and the citizens of Ukraine have shown this clearly and unambiguously. Germany thinks pulling the SWIFT lever should be held in reserve for now as part of a future third tranche of sanctions. And President Biden says targeting Russian banks directly will cause Putin more pain. The Kremlin's replied any problems the sanctions cause can be resolved. Even as the invasion unfolds, there is talk of talks. Ukraine said it wants peace and is ready to speak to the Kremlin. Moscow has welcomed that, but said its expectations of Kyiv remain unchanged.
Jane Deeth there. Well, earlier I spoke to the EU ambassador to the UK, Joël Valdalmeida, and started by asking if he feared the EU and the West is impotent in the face of Russian aggression.
Well, first of all, I feel that I owe a word of solidarity with our Ukrainian friends. They have been the victims of an unprovoked, unjustified, unlawful aggression by the Russian leadership and the Russian regime. And this is the first word that comes to mind. And our thoughts are with our Ukrainian friends in these very difficult moments. But we need to act, and we are acting with great resolve. Not only us, the European Union, but together with partners like the United Kingdom or the United States or Canada, Australia, Japan and beyond. There's a coordinated effort to send a very clear message to the Russian leadership. This cannot go on. Most importantly, we are acting on the economic front, and we just adopted an unprecedented package of sanctions.
You talk about an unprecedented package of sanctions. You talk about great resolve. Yet here we are, Russian missiles raining down on Ukraine, people dying, fleeing their homes, the very real prospect of a European capital falling to aggressors within days, if not hours.
This is a dark hour for Europe, clearly so. But let me be very clear, this is the sole responsibility of the Russian leadership.
Yes, but as you say, you have to act. You say this is a show of strength, and yet look at what is happening on the ground.
It is a show and a very clear message that we are determined to exercise pressure, unprecedented pressure, on the Russian regime. We adopted a package of sanctions which is, again, unprecedented. I've never seen this in my already long life as a European diplomat. We are attacking 5 sectors, key sectors. We are hitting and hurting the heart of the Russian regime.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but you will not implement one of the key sanctions the Ukrainians are asking for, which is to remove Russia from the SWIFT banking system.
I don't think we should focus excessively on a single message. If you look at what we have done on the financial side of this package, which is a very important element of it, we are basically attacking and impacting upon 70% of the Russian banking system. We are actually preventing them from accessing to financial means to support the war effort.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you say
access to financial means.
You say let's not focus on this one measure. Ukraine's foreign minister is literally begging you to do this in really desperate terms. You know that he has said those who refuse to do this will have the blood of Ukrainians on their hands.
I think we should look at the entirety of our package, touching on key sectors of the Russian economy and key sectors for the Russian regime: energy, finance, technology, visas, transport. 5 key sectors.
But yet you know, you will have heard the Ukrainian president say, this morning we are defending our state alone, and the world's most powerful forces are watching us from afar. I wonder, when you hear that, do you feel a tinge of shame or embarrassment?
I feel a strong sense of condemnation of the action of the Russian regime, and that's where we should focus our attention. Within the G7, between the EU and NATO, with our transatlantic and Asian partners, and now at the United Nations. And I'd like to appeal to all the nations to concentrate their efforts in sending a very united and a very strong message to say this needs to stop.
Do you think it will be enough to stop Russian tanks rolling into Kyiv?
We have to do everything we can on our side. At the same time, we need to be very clear about who is to blame for this situation. And we are not blaming the Russian people. We are blaming the Russian leadership.
Ambassador, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you for hosting me.
Well, joining me now is the former Prime Minister of Finland, Alexander Stubb. Thank you very much for coming back on our programme again, Mr. Stubb. I just want to put this to you. The Ukrainian president, feeling very high and dry, left by the West, and obviously, you know, the Russian troops encroaching on his capital and possibly on him personally, is saying, and said just now actually, in Russian, that he's prepared to talk about neutrality with Moscow. We've just had that confirmed. As someone who ran a neutral country, Finland, would you advise him to go down that road?
Well, perhaps a little correction. Finland is not a neutral country, and we haven't been since the Cold War. We don't belong to a military alliance, but we chose our football team when we joined the European Union on the 1st of January 1995, and are very in a deep cooperation with NATO, and more NATO compatible than many NATO states. I would advise the president to have talks, but I would advise him obviously against neutrality. The situation is very different, and it's not that dissimilar to what I was involved with in 2008, negotiating peace in Georgia when Russia invaded Abkhazia and South Ossetia. What I like about the Ukrainian president is that he seems very calm, cool, collected, and stable in this extremely difficult situation. So I would advise for talks, but I would stay clear from neutrality.
The reason why people here think he said what he said today, especially in Russian to the Russians, is that he feels left high and dry by the West. Does he have a point?
Yes and no. I think we have to look at this from 2 perspectives. One is the war on the ground. And there, I must say that it is, of course, with deep sadness and fear as well that I watch the Russian troops advancing and the Ukrainian troops fighting back. The second track is actually the one that was discussed in the previous snippet there, the sanctions. They're not going to solve everything, but they are, I think, quite far-reaching as we stand. The thing is that Ukraine is not a member of the European Union. Ukraine is not, unfortunately, a member of NATO, and therefore being left alone is an unfortunate and relative reality at this particular moment.
When you put it like that, it sounds pretty harsh, but it also rings true. Do you, though, agree with the EU ambassador in London, who we heard just now being interviewed by Jackie, that enough has been done, that this is not all about SWIFT? Because here they are absolutely furious that the European Union has not taken these steps.
Well, I was listening to the conversation there earlier, and let me be clear, from my experience, this is so far the swiftest and actually the most far-reaching sanctions package that I've seen. And you have to understand that it happens in 3 waves. So wave number 1 was when Russia recognized Donbass, the region. Wave number 2 came yesterday, and wave number 3 will come. So SWIFT will be on it. Do not worry about it. But what the European Union wants to do is take it in step by step and get a clear legal basis for doing it as well. I think we're moving towards a situation whereby Russia will be fully isolated.
Okay, but step by step doesn't really work with a guy who's sent an invasion force into an entire country in one large step yesterday. So should one be much more dramatic in one's measures to try and exert a degree of punishment on the Russian president?
So the attack started a little bit over 24 hours ago, and we've implemented already a second package. There's been a lot of promise about different types of military equipment and help coming out. You know, this is a question of hours and days, that's for sure. But rest assured, you know, the West is doing everything that it possibly can in this situation. The sort of counter question, I mean, there's a lot of frustration at the moment and a lot of sort of finger pointing. Let's look at the facts on the ground and what can be done realistically. And I think that the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union are doing everything that they possibly can. We're just entering a new era, I think, of international relations. And this will take a few days. I mean, I'm sure that the political leaders at the moment are doing everything that they possibly can.
Okay. Alexander Stubb, have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. As you say, this will take a few days, but a few days or perhaps hours is all they have left in this city, which at the moment has got a Russian noose around it, as troops are encroaching on the capital, on the seat of power, on the parliament and on the presidential palace eventually. That is what you're dealing with, an act of international geopolitical blackmail with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and the Ukrainians here. That's it.